I'm Dr. Barry, licensed psychologist, and here I share legal and entertainment news from a psychological perspective. And this case, Netflix's Tell Them You Love Me, is where the legal and the entertainment side, because there was a documentary made about this court case. And the details of it are complex. It brings up issues of consent, boundaries, race, privilege. It brings up a lot of different things. And then also, I want to be careful because just because someone is nonverbal does not necessarily mean that they are unable to give consent. I think there are a lot of different things that go into this, and there are aspects of this case that are incredibly troubling to me. And so, if this is one, if you need to not watch, come back to another one. If you're going to sit around and join us, please do. And please let me know your questions along the way. I do these live, and a special shout out to the replay crew, people that will watch later. I do my best if people have questions that they would like for me to answer. I try, but sometimes people are going back and forth in the comments and it has nothing to do with me. So I try to keep an eye on all of that. You all asked for me to cover this one, and this documentary was done in a way that tells the family story, and it also tries to have you see things from Anna's perspective as well. And then I'm just going to talk about some of the things that might be going on behind the scenes psychologically for multiple people involved. This is not a psychological evaluation. I don't know any of these people in real life. And so these are just my opinions based on publicly available information. That's the disclaimer for today. And so seriously, you all asked for this one, and so thank you for asking. I probably wouldn't have watched it. I knew the details of the story, and there is an episode where they go into the specifics of what happened, and that personally for me, that turned my stomach, like, that was difficult to listen to, but overall, the documentary wasn't overly triggering because I have to be careful. I have a heavy caseload, and then I follow a lot of true crime things, and so I'm very mindful about what I watch and what I, kind of look up, and so I wanted to be careful with this one. Let's dive right into an overview of this one. All right, let's get into it. All right. So Netflix did a true crime documentary, and it's called Tell Them You Love Me. And while watching this film, you really might have questions that kind of come up for you, and so that is what we are going to talk about. I also saw an interview, somebody covered, some interviews that the director, Nick August Perna, some interviews that he did. I'm not going into those, but I have linked another phenomenal video that really goes into some of these things in depth. I linked that video down in the description. All right. So Netflix's Tell Them You Love Me delves into the controversial relationship between a white, abled professor and a nonverbal black man with cerebral palsy, which led to a nationwide debate over power dynamics, disability, and race. After the man's after so the family and the court really felt that he was unable to give consent. The documentary centers on whether Johnson, so whether Anna, who is I'm sorry, not that's not Anna, that's Derek. So whether Derek Johnson, who is nonverbal, could communicate through facilitated communication and give consent. And I will go deeper into facilitated communication in just a moment. The court initially answered no to the question of consent, and Anna Stubblefield was sentenced to 12 years in 2015. later that was overturned, and you find that out at the very end of the documentary that her, sentence was overturned. She pled guilty to a lesser charge, and, she had, I think, already served 2 years in jail, and I believe she was released at that time. Alright. Ooh, wow. Alright. And so Tell Them You Love Me centers on firsthand testimony from Anna Stubblefield and then Johnson's family. And then also there are some experts that speak, and they're experts that have their own and I guess the word is disability, that have certain things that just they might speak different. They might process things different. There are people that have different abilities. And, all right. So how did Anna and Derek meet? All right. So in this picture, the Derek is the shorter one in front of his brother John. And I believe it's his mother that's over in the corner of this picture. Yes. Derek and his brother John Johnson. So this might be a nurse or somebody. This might not be his mom. That might be a nurse. All right. Anna Stubblefield and Derek Johnson crossed paths in 2009, and she was, I believe, in her 40s at the time, and he was 30, through his brother John Johnson. John was a PhD student at Rutgers University and took Stubblefield's philosophy and disability studies class. And the troubling thing for me about this is Anna Stubblefield, she is an ethics professor, and she kind of prided herself on talking about issues related to race and issues related to disability. And I think this is my personal thought. I think she desperately wanted to see him as having certain abilities, and there are questions about whether or not he really did have that. And there's some scrutiny of facilitated communication, which I will dive deeper into a little bit later. But what facilitated communication can do is there can be this blurry line between the facilitator's communication and what the person who has the person that's nonverbal, the way that they are communicating. And in my opinion, Anna started to get more and more controlling. It's not just my opinion, the family said this as well. Over time, Anna started to get more and more controlling, saying that Derek preferred wine over beer, that he was vegetarian, that he liked classical music versus gospel music. And it seemed like she was trying to turn him into something that she wanted. And at the time of all of this, Anna Stubblefield, she is married and has, I want to say, 2 kids. And there are likely some issues happening within her relationship. And I the family might have seen this different if Derek had met someone in his day program that, he showed interest in, and the other person, but, like, not a staff member, somebody that, if he had met somebody in some other way. She was not his therapist, so Anna Stubblefield, she was not his therapist. She came on to help see if he could communicate, if they could give him a way to communicate, and over time, he was enrolled in a class through her help. It was a little, I'm not sure what to make of. There was a student that also did facilitated communication with him, and it's my understanding that he, wrote a one-page paper about a book that the student had not read. Now, the student's roommate was taking the same class, and the student felt that Derek had a lot of the thoughts that like a lot of things that he brought up was similar to the things that her friend brought up. because the family's gonna say they tried to do facilitated communication with him, and they were unable to communicate through the device with him, that they would try to do exactly what Anna was doing, and they were not able to have that. They weren't able to get anywhere with it. All right. I'm gonna come back to the comments just to see. Okay, good. So somebody said that was his mom. It looked like her. It really did look like her. I agree that in all of this, Anna, I don't think she has any awareness into just how her behavior, how that could have impacted him, how she could have used him to meet an unfilled need in her own life. Because it sounds like she might have been unhappy, that there were things going on in her, and then she tried to make him into who she wanted to be. All right. And so at some point the relationship, because they were intimate twice, and then the family finds out later because Anna is pushing for him to have more and more independence and saying that he wants to live on his own, and or that he wants to go to a place where instead of his family taking care of him, that there's going to be staff taking care of him. And in my opinion, it seemed as though she was consciously or unconsciously distancing him from his family. That's how it seemed to me. And this is where sometimes people can think that they're such the expert on some of these things that they might end up actually having some blind spots in it all. And the fact, because she said she started to fall for him once he started reading these books, and once he became more intellectual, that was when she started to become attracted to him. And the details of this case, when you get to just how they were physically intimate, that it's my understanding when she described things that, like, the first time that they kissed, that he might have pulled back, and he's nonverbal, and to me, him pulling back might have been some confusion of, "What's this?" But she's saying he then directed her to take off her clothes, and that she would get out the device, and she said that he was the one directing all of this. The hardest part about all of this is that she's the one that is telling this entire story. And I'm so glad that you mentioned, so Dr. Y'all know me and names. Dr. Vander Vark, he's a psychiatrist. He did a phenomenal video. So this is the video that I have linked down in the description, and he brought up the Pygmalion delusion. Pygmalion delusion, and we are going to break that down as well. So this all comes from his video. I had heard about narcissist, I had heard about echo, but there is another kind of psychological effect that comes out of, I don't know if it's like Greek mythology, but it kind of it there's so I'm gonna dig deeper into this in just a moment. His video, so I had never heard of his channel, and I commented on his video. He did a very thorough take at the end, and I could really relate because at the end, he even realized that he kinda went off on a tangent, and he was like, "Why did I do that?" And I was like, "I do that too." So, I have that video linked down in the description. And, I do wanna be very careful as we are talking about this, because individuals who have less power, and that lack of power might be by their age, by their capacity or ability, their ability to communicate, because after all of this happened, the only way for Derek to communicate with his family was through Anna. Anna was his voice. She was the only one besides that student, she was the only one that was able to kind of reach him in that way, and but she's the one that's benefiting from this I don't know what to ca from their interaction, and that's concerning for me. Now, there are different types of communication devices. So there are devices where the person is able to it's like where they're able to communicate on their own, and I've worked with people that are nonverbal, and our goal was to try to help them communicate through pictures, through sign, through various ways, because the inability to communicate your wants and needs can cause additional frustration. And Dr. Andrew brought it up, and I will bring it up as well. Derek's family seemed to accept him for who he was, and they didn't try to change him. They didn't try to make him into something that he wasn't. I think the brother John, I think he was really hoping that maybe he could communicate with his brother in some way. But I think it was to keep him the way he was. I don't think he was trying to change him, to turn him into this like intellectual, or because that's what Anna seemed to do, and, uh, it was it's 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 interesting, and there are people that are nonverbal that do they express their sexual desires. I've had to set boundaries with, and it wasn't my client, it was a client's family member, because they would sometimes be kind of handsy, like, they love to hug new people, but for my boundary, like, I only do, and they weren't my client, and so my boundary is that we could do high fives, but that they couldn't hug me. That was my own personal boundary. And because I think things have to go both, what, like, I have to be okay with it, and the other person has to be with it, they have to be okay with it as well, and there has to be a balance of control and power. And in my opinion, in this situation, Anna was the one with all the control, all the power. Did Derek even understand that she's married and having an affair on her husband? And, like, it's just because even if he was typing all of the messages and all of those things, Derek was unable to control his bowels. He's not able to walk on his own all the time. Like, he needs assistance. He needs support. Physically, in really every way, he needed support. And the court gave him a mental age of about 12 months. And I would hope that some of that included nonverbal communication as well. There are nonverbal tests of intellectual ability. So when I work with individuals that are on the autism spectrum, sometimes I've gotten referrals to determine if somebody has an intellectual disability and autism, or do they just have autism and their intellectual ability is in the, low average, average, that they're in, that their capacity is within a certain range. Because sometimes there is a test that where I show them how to do everything, and it takes out the language. Like, I don't have to ask them questions. It's completely nonverbal, and that test is often a better predictor of somebody who is nonverbal, because just because a person isn't verbal doesn't mean that they're not communicating. And that's what Dr. Andrew pointed out as well, that, like, the brother said, DJ Derek, he doesn't like wine. Like, we go to church, and at communion, he doesn't like wine. he said, like, when they're listening to gospel music, he's dancing, he's happy. And Anna, to me, was trying to make him into what she wanted, and that leads us into the Pygmalion effect. All right? I'm gonna make this text bigger. There we go. Whew. The Pygmalion effect is a psychological phenomenon in which high expectations lead to improved performance in an area and low expectations lead to worse performance. It's named after the Greek myth of Pygmalion, a sculptor, not the sculptor who fell so much in love with the perfectly beautiful statue he created that the statue came to life. The psychologists Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson present a view that has been called into question as a greater deal. So as more people research this finding, it reminds me of the expectation bias that can happen with teachers, where if a teacher expects or thinks a student is capable of learning, they will spend more time with them. But if the teacher thinks the student doesn't have the capacity to learn it, they won't spend as much time with the student. And those two researchers held that high expectations can lead to better performance, low expectations lead to worse, which leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy. But this is where how this kind of effect applies is that she could have subconsciously fell in love with this blank slate that she then created to be what she wanted and was lacking and what she needed. And it really wasn't about Derek's best interest. And there are some things in Anna's background that come up. So I thought it was strange that when she was a child, so this isn't so the strange part is her pretending to have or not pretending, like, she would play as though she had a disability, and she was very intrigued with disabilities because her mother worked with disabled children. That was something that her mother was very passionate about, and let me get to my notes because there were some good quotes from the show. Um because in the show, Anna said that she did not want to rewrite things in her head, but ooh, oh, really. All right. And so facilitated communication uses a different area of the brain. I like to say sometimes differently abled versus disability because an individual can have a disability and still be able to function, still be able to go to college, still be able to do all these things. They just might need some accommodations. And so most colleges have they're normally accessibility offices. That's what they're called now. That's where if someone has ADHD or if they have severe anxiety, if they have certain diagnoses, that they can get help and support at the college. There's also a local college in Virginia that has a program for students with autism where they can do a college program where they're trained in a field and they're provided a ton of support in order to possibly be just to in a way that can meet their need for students that are a good fit for that type of program. um when I was watching this, the issue of transference came up for me because to me she seemed to be creating what she wanted and blurring the lines of her needs and his needs. And we're going to get to a statement by her ex husband a little bit later that might shed a little light on what could be happening. But yes. All right. And so, and this is where The whole she kept mispronouncing his name because the family called him D-man, and she's calling him Demand, or like she was saying his name wrong, and that bothered people in the comments. That bothered me as well. All right. So let's talk about the potential of bias, because to me, I'm not sure she was aware that she was fully taking into account the difference between what she wanted and what he truly needed, and making sure that he was protected. Because if she was really concerned about his protection in all of this, I would think she would be openly communicating with his family. And yes, Margaret, Dr. Andrew brought up the Ouija board, and he kind of went over some of the dynamics of why it moves, because even if you don't move at all, like we do subtle, like it's such a slippery surface that it will move around. Um, and Sarah, I've seen George, because to me it's Jorge, but his family, I think, 'cause in the news they call him George, and I think his family might have called him George. I think he was a junior, and I don't know if he was trying to distance himself from, I don't know, from, I don't know. I don't know, but uh the whole George Jorge thing, so you'll hear me use it both ways sometimes, but I believe the family calls him George as well. Alright. Let's see. I just wanna make sure I'm not missing anything from my notes, because alright. Yes. Alright, because when she was a child, she would like, she made pretend crutches for herself, she learned Braille and sign language. She seemed to have this fascination with the disability, mm, but was that a way to get attention from her mom, or almost regretting, or, like, almost, like, wanting to be different in that way? Like, it was very strange to me. Just when I heard it and when I was watching it, it seemed very, very strange to me, okay? Um, so this is what Anna said, okay? Because she's gonna say that one time she tried to change the way he was saying something, and he supposedly says, "Don't you ever put words in my mouth." Something to that effect. Like, to say it the way he said it. That's what she says, but it's almost as though she's having this conversation with who she wants him to be. So I think this brings us right to facilitated communication. This is supported typing. And for some individuals, what they do with facilitated communication is they stabilize their elbow so that the individual is better able to type. I'm going to make myself bigger just so we can see this part. So sometimes with facilitated communication, it's like supporting the elbow so that they do this. What Anna had to do is that she had to, so this was his hand. She had to cup her hand around his, and then she's saying he would point to what he wanted. They've done studies on this, and I thought that Frontline documentary that they bring up in this documentary was really telling, where they show the facilitator one picture, and the facilitator doesn't know that they flipped, and they've shown the individual a different picture, and the facilitator types out what they saw. So they show the facilitator a dog, and they show the individual a cat, and the facilitator says the person typed dog, but they were shown cat. And then there's other situations where they show the facilitator and the person the same, picture and the and the person types out the correct one. But sometimes what you're getting with some types of facilitated communication, and I think the more control, the more support somebody needs, the bigger chance that there might be some bias. Now, if somebody is able to independently operate it on their own, or if you're just supporting their elbow, I don't know. There might be less chance, but the way she had to facilitate it, in my mind, I wonder if that also opened it up to different things. Because they did tests with Derek where they said, "Point to the cup, point to a fork." And with the facilitated communication, I think with Anna facilitating, they asked questions of, "Who is Sally?" And Sally is his aunt. And instead of saying Aunt Sally or aunt, like that's auntie, instead of saying aunt, he said, "My mother's sister." And that just that's true. And so that's where just a lot of this can get really, really confusing. For me personally, the fact that the family couldn't facilitate it as well, that when they tried to facilitate with him, sometimes he would like push their hand away. The fact that she is saying, so she's bringing in the device and he's saying he doesn't eat meat. But if they gave him chicken, he would eat it. And so like to me, his already intact nonverbal communication of "I like this, I don't like this," that didn't seem to develop as she's saying his cognitive ability is flourishing and he's turning into this, she awakened a new man. Like that's what she's saying. And she's even telling the family because at some point she kind of turns on the family because I think it's her belief that the level of disability is based on the environment. I'll say that again. Her belief was that the level of disability was strongly influenced by the person's environment. And in my opinion, and from kind of what she said, it seems like she didn't think his environment was doing enough for him and that she could provide the environment for him to thrive without acknowledging her own selfishness, bias, and the ethics of all of that, of ripping this person from his family. Like, she didn't acknowledge any of that, and that's why as a therapist, excuse me, I'm not friends with my clients. I just finished season 9 of Suits. I didn't realize season 8 of Suits came out, and so I finished season 8 and 9 recently, and there's a therapist in the show. I won't give you any spoilers, but in the show, the therapist kind of gives the client the option of, "Do you want me to be your friend or do you want me to be your therapist?" And I would never discontinue with a client to be their friend. Because once again, God forbid something happen in that friendship, they could always come back against my license and say, "You were my therapist. This relationship started as my therapist and you took advantage of me." And so for me personally, I keep those boundaries very, very clear for me. And then the idea of being savior, particularly like a white savior saving this poor black man who, because even within facilitated communication, there weren't a lot of African Americans, and I think his brother thought that they could trust her. And I'm sure this was a huge betrayal for the family. I'm sure it made the family, like, it made it hard for them to maybe even trust. That's why sometimes if people have a caregiver providing care where they're bathing them, where they're changing diapers and doing those kinds of things, sometimes they will have cameras just so that they can make sure that nothing inappropriate is happening. And depending on the person's level of functioning, because sometimes that can be invasive if the person, does need autonomy. And the brother has since completed his PhD. I think he used a lot of his kind of knowledge in this area to kind of help, because the family went to the police when she wouldn't stop. Because if she hadn't tried to continue to keep contact, it's my understanding that the family told her to not contact Derek anymore, and she tried to set up a secret meeting at his day program, then that's when the family was like, "No, this is too much. This is too much." And all right, it's a lot, y'all. This is a lot. I'm glad that we're able to talk and have this conversation because okay, but let's keep talking about facilitated communication. So that's that supported typing, and there are people that still love it and still think it's a really helpful tool, but the American Psychological Association, I think, because in the show, I think I wrote it down, all the organizations that say not to use it. Did I write it down? My notes are not doing what my notes should be doing. But I know it was the American Psychological Association, and then there were a few other associations that also said that, facilitated communication, that they did not think that it was the potential for bias was just too great, and so alright, and so they have this communication partner, and they're also called a facilitator. Alright. And it became very popular, and then they did some studies on it, and then after those studies, there we go, 1994, the American Psychological Association passed a resolution cautioning against the use of facilitated communication, citing the lack of scientific evidence. Also, the American Speech and Language Hearing Association, the International Society for augmentative and alternative communication, that there are other ways that you can try to communicate with somebody versus having this typed tool. So I've had some clients where we've developed a peck board or a picture board where they're able to touch, because our goal is to give them communication, because when somebody has a way to communicate that they're hungry, that they're tired, that they're thirsty, that their basic needs, that they're wet or anything. When somebody has a way to communicate that, it causes less frustration. It improves their quality of life. I wasn't sharing my screen for that part. I thought I was sharing my screen with y'all, and I was not sharing my screen. Alright, there we go. And so I have the links to all of these down in the description, but this is that section that has all of those different associations that have said that they've cautioned against the use of facilitated communication. And in this wiki article, they even talk about, ooh, these are all the opponents of facilitated communication. It's a long list. And I believe they mention the Stubblefield case. Blind testing, yes, yes. And they have the researchers that did that. And then media, and then I think they're gonna, yes, allegations and facilitator misconduct, because sometimes they were using this to say that things had happened to try but because it's so open to facilitator bias, conscious or subconscious, because that facilitator desperately wants to give this person a voice, and it must have been hard for the family to try to facilitate with him and not be able to, and then to see her doing it And that must have been hard, especially for her to then tell them that they were just doing it wrong, or to minimize the role and the impact that they were having. And so in this wiki article on FC, they talk about facilitated communication. All right. So one of the last things that I wanted to share was to just dive a little deeper to talk about, um, with consent, the person should be enthusiastic, sober, willing, unaffected by roles, bias, social pressures. And there's always a potential for human error and misinterpretation, and that's where communication is key. And I think she knew that his family wasn't gonna be on board with it, because why would did it have to be a secret? Why did it have to be something they were sneaking around doing if there was nothing wrong? And I think from her perspective, she would just say that nobody understood their love, that they were misunderstood, this and that. Like, I honestly think, because she still kind of defends her actions, the way that she still talks about him, you can see admiration. I don't like you see some things, but the statement from her husband was troubling to me, and we will get to that in just a moment. Let me upload that there. All right. So, all right. In the documentary, they talk about that part. So this is a bigger picture of Anna Stubblefield. I don't think I shared that earlier. Ooh. All right. And so, was she delusional, or was she just willfully blind to what was happening? I will never know. I don't know what was going on with her. I know the family didn't feel that it was love. I know, um she wasn't single. She was married. And I think there are too many questions around privilege and power in this case. And this is where this case is very complex. So, Dr. Andrew asked, was this willful self deception or was it delusion? And he didn't give an answer to that either. But the statement from the husband has me leaning more towards something willful. And so, this was a statement from Roger Stubblefield. He said, I do believe that Anna is a pathological liar and narcissistic. I believe it possible that given any opportunity, she would definitely repeat the effort to pose herself as Anne Sullivan to Helen Keller, or perhaps a martyr like Anne Frank. She will stop at nothing to fool the court and seek vindication, regardless of the emotional and financial expense to her family or the primary victim's family. And that's where it just seemed to me that in all of this, she prioritized what she wanted and what she needed and her wants, thoughts, and desires. And did she really consider Derek? Did she? Because I think if she had, I think things would have happened different. I think there would have been more openness. There wouldn't have been as much secrecy. There wouldn't have been this disrespect of his family. And I don't think she ever saw anything that she did as being disrespectful, but the family felt that she was looking down on them because of their race, and that she was trying to elevate him to be cultured, like to listen to classical music, and she was undermining a lot of the things that they cared about. And these were his traditions for like for 30 plus years. And so that's where I think this case is complicated. I'm glad that we got to talk about it. Margaret, I'm glad that we got back to Anne Sullivan because the husband agreed with you that uh, and um so her husband so I don't know the, "Oh, wow, he'd known." So I don't know what that part is because, her husband wasn't aware of this until the police showed up and, like, all the court stuff started. So he was not aware of the affair. That's my understanding. She ended up losing her teaching license her teaching position at Rutgers, of course, and so that's what happened. Kelly, I think if this was gonna proceed in any way, there would have needed to be boundaries. And that's where I do think somebody that's nonverbal can love, can develop a attraction or like or care for somebody else, but there needs to be a balance of power and there needs to be openness and the person needs to be like aware of any potential bias. It reminds me of the people that take advantage of individuals in comas, and or somebody that is physically just unable to move or say anything. And because so what Anna would say was that her and Derek came to the family to profess their love for one another. And during that meeting, the brother John gets so angry he has to walk out. The mother is just kind of in shock, like, "What? What's going on?" Because they're not getting an idea of any of this. It's my understanding that they won a lawsuit that Anna was sued after this, and, and that they did win a financial lawsuit. So at when all of this started, he was 30 years old. His mental age that the court system gave was 12 months. Like, they gave him, so he was unable um, to walk for long periods independently. He was not, uh potty trained, like, he wore a diaper. She had to remove his diaper too, and the details of that part are that's the part that was kind of, triggering for me because of her role of power. If this had been, like, 2 people, n not that were more similar, and not necessarily, like, the other person had to be nonverbal as well, but he didn't seem from what the family saw, like, he wasn't trying to kiss her or hold her hand. He wasn't trying to do those things, and after this so before all of this, he wasn't he wasn't masturbating, he wasn't having issues. He developed behavior issues after all of this, and so, um this is a great question. Is there a chance she was right and this was what he wanted? We'll never know because he didn't have a consistent way to communicate what he wanted. The When he was evaluated, they tried to ask him questions and it sounded like his understanding of receptive and expressive language that it was very, very low, that it was much lower than what she was professing. And yes, they gave him between 12 to 18 months. Okay. Now that's where I would also want to know how he was tested, what assessments he was given. Did they give nonverbal assessments? Um, and but it's my understanding that they like had items in front of him and they asked him to point to the fork or to pick up the fork and he was unable to do basic tasks. And since all of this, he hasn't like if he sat in front of a computer, he doesn't have this awareness and knowledge, because she was saying that he was reading, college level books, and he was doing all of these things. That was all of what she was saying, but that's where it seemed like she fell in love with what she created and not who he was. So the family loved him for who he was and just wanted to give him a voice. For her, because the mother would be dressing him and she would come in with a communication device and say, "Do you wanna wear the undershirt?" And he would type, "No." But when actually, like, if you're addressing someone that's nonverbal, if they don't wanna wear something, they'll start trying to take it off. They will show you in a nonverbal way. And so she was saying that he wanted and didn't want things and liked and didn't dislike things, but those things only happened when she was around. It didn't happen when she wasn't around. And so that's where I really question, like, was he saying what she was saying he was saying? And if somebody else could have facilitated for him, I still think there could have been a potential ethical boundary, because he ended up with physical injuries. Like, he ended up with bruises on his back, um, from from at least one of their physical interactions, because it was at her office, on the floor, on a mat. And he has physical limit, like, he has, and she says that she gave him the device to make sure everything was okay. I It's hard for me to trust that if she won't acknowledge, like, that she could potentially have some bias in all of this. And those are just kind of my thoughts. That's how I see this. These are the concerns I have as somebody that has worked with individuals that are nonverbal. I've worked with individuals that cognitively, intellectually, they are on point. Like, they are, they're probably smarter than I am. But socially, I worried about an individual manipulating or controlling them because they struggled with certain social aspects. And so we talk about, healthy relationships. We talk about signs, or how to let somebody know if something isn't okay, because there are some deficits with, like, social, about their social age is much younger than their mental age. And those are the issues that I have. Um, so he had cerebral palsy. I didn't say his specific diagnosis. He was not only nonverbal, his mother told in the documentary that he had significant seizures during his developmental years, and that likely impacted his cognitive development and his early learning. Agreed. And her ex-husband's statement, for me, after seeing the entire documentary and her not even being able to acknowledge just what, like, because I think if she had it to do again, if she could go back, I don't think she would have changed anything. I think she feels she helped him. She probably thinks he's worse off without her. Like, in her mind, she probably thinks he would be better off if they could be together, which is, and so what kind of therapy would he need after this type of incident? So he doesn't participate in, like, talk therapy. They might do behavior like ABA, but I would want it to be safe. Um, if they needed to redirect, because it sounds like he developed some behavior concerns after, around the time things kind of started, and after. So that's my thought. Um, if I was working with this family, I would be supporting the family around his needs, around any difficulty trusting professionals, any difficulty just kind of needing to process and go through their experience. I'm sure the brother John so the brother John didn't do anything wrong. He didn't know that she would take advantage. Like, in my opinion, it seems like she took advantage of his brother. I don't think there were those glaring red flags, and what happened was, uh, as Anna started to get more controlling, the brother was the one that was like, "Let me research this FC a little bit more." Like, he started to kind of question, "Is my brother really saying and doing all the things that she's saying?" And I'm sure that had to be hard for the family because that family desperately wanted him to have a voice, but the voice he had sounded a lot like the perfect man that Anna wanted and not, his brother, the mother's son. Like it sounded like she was creating something she wanted. And so, um thank you for adding this. She's on probation. Oh, she's on probation. 'Cause I'm sure she has like, she's not able to have any contact. The brother John, he really seemed like a really good guy. My heart really broke for the whole family. My heart also broke for the mom because there were times that Anna tried to make it seem like she wasn't doing enough and she wasn't good enough and she couldn't handle and provide him what he needed. And that's where, like, as a white woman coming into this black single mother's home, trying to then separate her from her child, I think Anna was lost in all of this. And okay, so Anna's ex husband is African American. Anna has biracial children. And that is where just because somebody like has a spouse that's of a different race doesn't mean that there can be subconscious that they're aware of how their behavior affects other people because she might have even thought, "Oh, I know what black men need. I know how to keep a." I don't know, like she might have thought some things, and none of that came up in the documentary. That's just Dr. Barry talking, okay? Um, and I can imagine. 'Cause so this comment says, "This doc was so upsetting. I do wish they explored the race dynamics a bit more, though. She used her academic field in twisted ways." And the brother's the one that brought it up. The documentary was made by 2 white men, and I'm sure they navigated that in a careful way, and, um, I'm sure the brother might speak more openly about it, and I wonder if he'll ever tell more of his side of the story, because I think she would have got more time if she had done this to a I hate to say this, but I'm just gonna say, if this had happened and the person looked like her, I think I think people we still have issues, we still have concerns, and the race part really got to me because there are ways in which the mental health field has not been safe for the global majority. There are ways in which the medical field hasn't been a safe place for African Americans. Like there are spaces that just haven't always been safe. So I attended mostly predominantly white colleges. It was what I got into. It was the colleges that I wanted to go to, and my I experienced not from I never experienced anything from my professors personally. I did experience things from other students. I heard other students say things where it's like, I can't believe you're going to be a licensed therapist one day and you have the thoughts and beliefs that you have. Like the multicultural class, like the times that race and things came up, the things that people believe. Now, I went to school in the early 2000s. Okay, so I am 41 years old. I graduated with my doctorate back in 2009. We weren't as open as we are about talking about race, about talking about being anti-racist. We we didn't have as many of these conversations. My school tried their best to have these conversations, but it was often led by a black professor that could sometimes feel as though like the students could possibly rate them low or they seem to walk on eggshells a little, I'll just be honest. They seem like there were some things that they just wouldn't say. I will say that I had a phenomenal experience where, I experienced both, my very first practicum, so my very first listening client, I experienced, racism directed towards me by a client, and, I also experienced it while I was on internship as well. And in both situations, I had phenomenal white supervisors that supported me, that were able to kinda talk me through things, and, it was a good experience for me personally. Not everybody has that experience, and there are times where even so I have my own private practice, and I know of at least a few people that I supported them in finding another therapist, but I know part of the reason why it didn't work was because when they heard my voice and pictured me in their mind, they didn't picture me. And so I wear my, like, African pride pictures. I have African art in my work office. If I could show y'all the other side, so I'm at my home office today. There are ways in which I express myself now that I didn't express myself before I had my own practice, and, there are people that have an issue with it, and, we we do what we do. There are even times where here on this app, I feel like people have questioned and said things to me that they would never question another therapist the way that they kind of come at me sometimes. And I don't dwell on those things. The way that I get through it, the way that I continue to do what I do and do what I love is to know that, like, there are people that hopefully we can have these safe conversations. We can think about how does race, how does economics, how do these different things. So the family, they probably couldn't afford to have a private FC facilitator come in, and so they probably needed to have this volunteer situation. There wasn't a program in their area. They would have had to travel. And so economics comes into this as well. And all of those things just complicate this case. And I wish that the ethics professor had been more aware of how her behavior, how what she did, how what she said, and her interpretation, and the potential for bias, how that can play out because the secrecy part. If she had been open with them from the start, I don't think the family would have ever pressed charges and she wouldn't have had any issues. It's the secrecy part. She did this. Now, he was 30. But and I don't know if the family had legal guardianship of him. I don't know if a doctor had deemed him where he didn't have the capacity and ability to make decisions for himself. I don't know if any of that had happened, but it just seemed like she was trying to come in and rescue him from this, and he had a good life. He has a good life. He has a good loving family, and from what I saw, she was trying to take him away from all of that, and that's problematic. And Kelly, I agree. It's the hiding it. The fact that all of that was done in secret, that she felt these feelings growing. I think she's told him that she loved him first. So Has a client ever told me that they loved me? And it was never like a romantic, so I've never had a client profess romantic feelings. I did have a client where I felt like there were some there were some concerns that I had, and I thought that they would do better with a male therapist. And when I t- and I referred them out to a male therapist. I just didn't feel comfortable working with the client. As a therapist, can I find a client attractive? Yes. Do you act on that? No, because I'm in a position of power. Now, she was not his therapist. She didn't have the same ethics, but she was in a helper role. She wasn't a caregiver, but she was in this role that I think there should have been some boundaries. And to me, I think she knew she was crossing the family's boundaries, and I don't think she cared. I don't think it didn't seem as though she cared. And what she would say is that Derek was the one that wanted it, but once again, she's the one holding his hand. She is his voice. And she didn't appear to have the insight that there could be potential bias with any of this. And so, um, I worked with clients that I was I was concerned about boundaries, and so what I did was I would keep a door open. And, because it would just be me, the client, and their parent in my lobby, and there's a nice distance, and I would sometimes keep that door open, or I would, have certain safety things in place where I made sure that everybody's safety, everybody's everything was the right way, because there was a therapist, okay, I wasn't gonna talk about it, but I think we have to. Was it in Ohio again? A therapist was sentenced, I think might have, was it Michigan? Okay, I'm gonna pull it up. It is Peyton Shires, and it was Ohio. I think she was the one that showed up at his door unannounced. I'm gonna share my screen. And this child was 13, like, this was a clear violation because, I wanna say he is a teenager, and so this was a clear, and then also she was his therapist. Um, and so let me share my screen. My child's coming for the iPad. Here you go. Alright, go ahead and close my door, please. Thank you. Alright, going to share this. Alright, so this is Peyton Shires. And she pled guilty. She ended up pleading guilty without them having to go to trial. And if they had went to trial, she was facing more years. So I don't know that this was purely altruistic that she did this, but, she was convicted of having inappropriate relations with her 13-year-old client, and she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. 5 years. And, ugh, they ended up, because she showed up to his house with a firearm, and she was saying that she was, like, feeling like harming herself, and she wasn't feeling like harming anyone else. But before court, that's what she did. They had video evidence of this. Like, this was just a very, very troubling case. And in it, she seemed to blame the victim. And so let's go on ahead. We're gonna have to listen to this. Let's go on ahead and listen to this real quick. I'm really sorry that all of this. Let's make this bigger. Imma try to turn the volume up as much as I can, and I'll turn on closed captions. You okay, let's go on ahead and play this.
I'm really sorry that all of this happened. I feel horrible that the mother and that their family has been affected so horribly by this and by my actions. I was not thinking rationally at the time that I showed up to the mother's house. Um, I was extremely suicidal. I never had intentions to harm anybody but myself, and I'm just thankful that she took the right steps to call the police, and she saved my life that day. Um, and also, I just feel horrible for the mistakes that I made in the social worker client relationship. I cared for him. I wanted to support him, but my lack of boundaries caused severe mistakes to be made. I'm praying for the family. I've been praying for the family since I've been in jail, and I just hope that they can heal from this. I hope that they can find peace and gain trust with other social workers in the future. And I'm hoping that this doesn't affect how he views women in relationships in the future, and that he can get the help that he needs and have a healthy relationship with his mother. I know that I messed up my bond and I lost trust with the courts, but I'm in a much better headspace now, and I'm going to continue to be. But I'm very sorry to everyone involved, and I wish that I could change the past, but all I can do moving forward is work on myself and heal. So I just hope that the family can also do that and find peace.
All right. Thank you.
All right. So she was sentenced to only, I think that was part of their plea deal. She was sentenced to 5 years. And in her statement to me, and I saw Law and Crime, I think it was Law and Crime or Court TV. I saw one of them cover this too. And it seemed like that was written by her and her lawyer. This seemed like all the things that you should say, but there didn't seem to be any emotion. She didn't seem sorry at all. Animal Cookie, I completely agree with you. There did not seem, in my opinion, to be remorse for what she did, for the things she did. And the judge, we might have to go back to it because the judge is going to bring up her pre-sentencing report where uh like she almost blames the victim. Like when she's meeting with the evaluator as part of her pre-sentencing and she blames the child. Okay, we have to keep going. Cuz I'm sure y'all are thinking, "No, she couldn't. She couldn't have."
Thank you. All right, the court has had the benefit of the pre-sentence investigation and will make a few comments. I'm to consider the seriousness of the offense, which is a serious offense. You violated the position of trust that you had. This young man was a child. He was a child. He was 13, 14 years old. That's a child. You're 23, 24 years old when all this was going on. You know, he was trying to get the help that he needed. In some ways, I'm a little I think you're genuine today. I do, and I do hope that you rebound from this eventually. This doesn't have to define you, but it will affect you for the rest of your life, as it should. But I was disappointed in the pre-sentence investigation and that you seem to blame him a little bit for trying to trick you and coerce you into having additional sex, blackmailing you. And, the whole incident started. You're the adult. You need to have the boundaries. You're trained professionally to deal with situations like this. But I will note that your score that we sometimes rely on, the Ohio Risk Assessment Score, is very low, meaning you're unlikely to offend again. You are going to have to register as a sex offender under Tier 2, which requires you to register, and you're going to have to sign this document. you have to register for a period of 25 years in person every 180 days. So whatever county you're living in is going to require you to go and register. If you leave the county for any period of time, for a week or 2 weeks, or move to another county, you have to register in that county, and you have to do so for 25 years, and you'll be kept in a database. It's going to affect the rest of your life.
Elaine, your mic. My bad. And the whole she blamed him. What? The adult. So if I'm working with a client and they start making some inappropriate statements, they start saying some things, I would have a conversation with the parent. I would have a conversation with the client and the parent. I would redirect the client. I would have to refer them to another therapist if they weren't being appropriate. Sometimes what can happen in these situations is a person can almost be flattered, or like they can have their own therapists become therapists for a reason, but they have to work out their own shit first. And if you haven't worked out your stuff, you can cause problems. And if something like this happened, she kind of had some stuff she needed to work on within herself.
Recycling
Oh,
is a lot like exercise.
all right. She had some stuff that she definitely needed to work on. And I only bring this case up because it's a abuse of power. It's there should be these boundaries. It's somebody that's not able to give consent, and the court found that he was not able to give consent. And this was another situation where the person was like, "Well," like, and they're trying to kind of put it on the other person, and I hold Honest Stubblefield, I hold that individual we just watched, I would want them to be held at a higher standard, and if these things are happening, but for a third, like, in the social worker situation, so she lost her license, she's gonna have to register as an offender. That's more cut and dry. I think Anna Stubblefield, I think she pled guilty to a much lesser charge. I'm not sure. Y'all were asking me in the chat, does she have to register as an offender? She did say that she struggles with getting jobs, and she tries to stay out of the limelight. She did this documentary, and this documentary is popular, but she does, like, a work from home job, and, that this has, like, affected what what she can do, but and Elaine must have said something funny, so let me go up and try to find it. Oh, for me, that was when I was talking about my mic. Alright, and so, um ooh, aw, Kelly, why do you have to ask me this question? It's a good question. There is something they're getting out of this, and, uh, that is where they are not having the appropriate professional and ethical boundaries, and, there are other situations like this where the individual is married. They seem to have, like, children, and their life seems to be going fine, and they don't put up those appropriate professional boundaries. And when I renew my liability insurance every year, like, one of the questions is, have you engaged in any like one of the questions is, are you have you had any intimate contact with any current or former clients? Like, they ask on my licensure, on my professional liability insurance. The answer is always no, because I told y'all, even if because my profession, I think, has a 7-year rule where a client that I saw and discharged 7 years ago, I could have, but for me, it's a never. Never, never, ever, because I was your therapist. And it has been interesting because sometimes I have clients that move and they want us to be friends. And I tell them that they can follow my public social media, if they ever need resources or things down the road that they can always reach out and ask. But I'm not going to add them on Facebook, or like I'm not going to add them as a friend any of those places. That's just my boundary. That's just a boundary that I have. Once I've been your therapist, and there are clients I've had where I would like, "Oh, like, I would love to be their friend. I would love to go get coffee with them. Like, I would love to, like, see them get married, or, like, I would love to go to their graduation." But within my profession, if I wouldn't do it for everybody, I don't do it. And so I don't go to client graduations. Now, if it was virtual, if I could watch from like my office or something, I had a client that, like, if they were really struggling and through our work they got through college, or they got through high school, or they got through a technical program, I might like watch it online. I don't give clients gifts. I've had clients give me, like, small gifts, and I try to give them something back. Um, uh, um, I'm going out of town eventually, and I'm gonna get something for, because a client gave me, it's not these earrings, I'll have to find them. A client gave me some, like, just some cute, just some, like, cheap, like, it wasn't expensive, and I'm gonna get them something when I go. There is a difference of power in that therapeutic relationship, in that doctor patient, in a professor student relationship, in a tutor. You know, like, they're just, you should have certain ethics and boundaries, I just think. And so, um, I love that you said this. I don't wanna be friends with my hairstylist. Keep those professional boundaries, relationships separate. I posted on X and I meant it. If I ever get into your Uber or Lyft, you will get a phenomenal tip if you just do not talk to me. Like, I love a good silent Uber or Lyft ride. Like, that is the best. I'm also an extrovert, and so, I did have a great conversation. We went down to Orlando, I think about a month ago, and we had a great conversation with our driver back to the airport. But so that's where I talk a good game, but like sometimes I do like talking. But I give a really good tip. If you don't talk to me and like we can just sit in awkwardness, I adore that. Please, like, just I'll put my earbud in and probably watch YouTube. That's probably what I'll do. And just let me do that. Aw, I had a therapist give me a cool bookmark, when I was little. I was struggling to read, and she was sweet to get it for me to encourage me to read. So, I do get clients, like, art projects, so sometimes I'll have clients, we do diamond art together, but I buy it as using my business, expense as part of our therapy, and it's not extravagant. I keep them to a budget. Like, I would never buy a client something expensive. I did have a client, I think it was when I had my child. I had a client try to give me like $100 gift card, and I gave it back to their parent to make sure. Like, I'm sorry, I can't accept this. I can keep the card because they gave me just like a sweet, because it's just a greeting card. I did keep the card, but I gave them back the gift card, and so um as a therapist, I don't accept tips. Like, that's not like, you don't like, that's not a thing. And so, boundaries are just so important, Kelly, and I think it's easy. Like, I don't think it's that hard, but, um I work with people that have had their boundaries violated, and I have worked with individuals that another therapist or psychiatrist that, like, was charged with what they did, engaged in inappropriate boundaries, and it was hard for those people to trust again. So when that second case that we took a look at, when she's like, "Oh, I hope he learns to trust. I hope he has healthy relationships with women." No, like, that is going to be hard. Like, I hope he does too, but he has some work that he has to do because the adult didn't do what they were supposed to do. The adult is supposed to have the boundary. There's, well, like a little teenage crush, like everybody. Like I was 13 or 14 and had a crush on like a 19 or 20-year-old. I'll never forget. Hopefully he doesn't follow me because it was I had a big old crush. But I was a little sister to him and no boundary was ever crossed. Like I was just a little sister. I had a big old crush. But, like, he didn't wanna be with a 14-year-old. I was a child. Like, we didn't have anything in common. No. Now, my husband is so I met him and I was let me see. I had already finished graduate school. And because he's 3 years younger, I never thought I would date younger, but, because I told him if I had met him when I was in college, so when I was a senior, he was a freshman at Virginia Tech, and we never crossed paths, we never met each other. When I was a senior at Tech, going off, I knew I was going to doctor school, I knew I was gonna go get my doctorate after that, I wouldn't have talked to him. I told him, I was like, "I'm so glad you didn't meet me when I was a senior at Tech, because I wouldn't have given you the I would have laughed. I would have laughed in your face. Aw, you little freshman. No. You go ahead and finish your classes. Talk to me once you finish your degree." I wouldn't have, um, uh, and so and so the next book is gonna be on parenting. That's the goal. That's the goal, and that's what yes, that's gonna be the goal. Next book is gonna be on parenting. Like, like finish your degree, then we can talk. So I met him once I was licensed. So it wasn't even once I graduated. So it must have been 2010. Yeah, I met him once I graduated. I'm telling you, if I had met him when I wouldn't have given them the time of day. 185 of you are still here. Thank you so much. If you like this video, if you like this content, please just give it a quick like. It helps it in the whole YouTube algorithm thing. It helps me continue to make content just like this. I'm gonna have to update my computer. And so I think some of the freezing, I think my computer is like not happy, and so, I'm gonna be getting a new computer. I wanted to thank Sandy, for being a member for a month. Uh, I love having your take on all these hearings. I'm so glad that we were able to cover it. Thank y'all for recommending it. Kelly, that's just what I was gonna get to. So, what's next? As long as I don't get distracted, I think what's next is talking about complex trauma and the development of personality disorders. Um, I do think that is going to be our next conversation. Yes, we love grizzlies here. Yes, yes, yes. And so, um, if I disappear, my phone died, and that'll be it. Computer, not my phone. But that's all I have for y'all today. That's what's coming up on Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Catch it on replay if you miss it live. And I hope y'all enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.